MPC and our brand Stay2 is active in the micro-living sector since roughly 5 years now. We started in 2014 with our first acquisitions and developments. Right now we are an integrated developer and operator of student housing in Germany mainly. We operate roughly 1,500 beds and 8 projects, some of them still under development, but we see that the German market has lots of opportunities right now and for the future, and we're really happy to be in that space right now.
Great, thanks, Brian.
Yeah, so I'm Brian Welsh from Nido Student. We are Nido Student's been going around for around 10 years, originally in London primarily, and now with about 2,500 operational beds in the UK. We're in the process of building around about 10,000 beds across Europe in the markets in Ireland, Portugal, Netherlands, and we're interested in most European markets. And I think I hold the prize for the worst photograph.
We'll organise a better one, Brian. Rainer.
Hi, good morning. I'm Rainer from International Campus. We are a developer, investor, operator in the student and co-living area. Where we cover, our home base is Germany. We cover as well the Netherlands and Austria, Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic. We got currently around 15,000 beds in operation and delivery, and we are further expanding across continental Europe.
Great, thank you. So we've got a good range of experience on different markets and some detail that we can dig into. And Brian, if my photo had been there, mine would have been the worst, so you're okay. Good. I mean, residential and particularly student housing continues to grow in Europe and is beginning to grow more as an institutional investment class. Rainer, what do you think are the key drivers for that? I mean, is it just a hunt for yield or what's going on here?
I think it's a combination of various aspects. One, we are now in a multi-year phase of extremely low interest rates, which leads to an absence of alternatives outside of real estate and equity investments for a lot of institutional investors. Within real estate, we have seen a sharp renaissance of resi and resi hybrids as they deliver stable income streams. They deliver interesting yields compared to other asset classes. And last but not least, this is embedded in demographic trends, reurbanization trends, which lead to a massive imbalance between demand and offer in most of the European cities. And it's not a European phenomenon. I think it's also the case in other parts of the world. But as we're focused on Europe now, let's stick to that. And so bottom line, I think it's a combination of looking for attractive yield, looking for sustainable income, and looking for, let's say, sustainable and robust investment type structures.
Okay, good. And Christian, just picking up particularly the micro-living part of that, how does that compare? How does that differ to the student housing concept? And I suppose, what are you seeing as the key trends in your part of the market?
We would say micro-living is more the umbrella under which also student housing and other parts of co-living fall. So student housing in Germany right now has reached a level of maturity where we really see deals happening, larger deals that attract investors, that lead to even more investors looking at the market, because now they see that they can put significant amounts of money into work. That was the problem, and that probably is also the issue for all younger markets. It just needs some time until you have a transaction volume that leads to a level of attractiveness for institutional investors, because you can't say, oh, we have a beautiful scheme here, center of Berlin, very attractive yields, but it's only 10 million. The big investors will say, thank you, but we can't do that. So right now, the German market is at a level where it starts to get interesting, because you see portfolios forming and things like that in the student housing sector. Zooming out to micro-living, we are not there yet. There are many products that call themselves micro-living. Investors and developers and also operators experimenting with these forms of living, not only tailored for students, but for other kinds of interested tenants that like the product. And as soon as we see a larger number of units available at the market, this overall segment will also become more interesting, especially in Germany.
Okay, good. And maybe, Brian, just pick up the situation in the UK, because obviously the UK was an early adopter in a way of this kind of student housing. What's the situation there, and how do you see that in comparison to the other European markets?
Well, I think as has already been said, the UK is viewed as the most mature market in student accommodation, and I've been in the sector for 15 years since it started, and have been witness to that kind of journey. And I think the general consensus is that we expect to see other European countries follow in a very similar journey. I think one of the limiting factors on micro-living, incidentally, as well as student accommodation, is the local government situation. It's around planning, it's around licensing. We still have regular conversations with mayors and authorities and councils across Europe who are yet to really embrace, or even in some cases understand, what we're talking about when we're talking about student accommodation. So coming to have conversations in places like this is a great opportunity for people to interact and become more educated on the sector. So in terms of the institutional nature, completely agree with the point that for a large institutional investors to get interested, you have to have opportunities of scale. And at the moment, everybody's in the process of aggregating those portfolios and building them up to create scale in those jurisdictions.
And Rainer, I mean, Samuel mentioned there that you've got a lot of these, and Brian as well, you've got a lot of these smaller portfolios. There were very few on that map. There were significant numbers. Do you think there's going to be that kind of consolidation, or I suppose, do you think there has to be that kind of consolidation within the sector if it's to grow significantly further?
I would be surprised if not. What you can see in the last, let's say, 12 to 25 months is there are way bigger tickets of capital coming into the markets looking for products than it has been in the years before. And if you want to divest 500 million euros in developments, you need to allow for what? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years. So the situation is that those will pick up products from the market which are stabilized, and I'm in that sector now for 10 years, and 10 years ago, if you wanted to invest 100 million euros in Germany, you couldn't find any product. We are now in a situation that the market is slightly more mature than 10 years ago, but still you would have hard times picking up significantly. And if you want to come to a certain lot size all over Europe in a decent time frame, I think consolidation is one of the key elements which will allow to do so.
Samuel, there's been a lot of, I've had a lot of, spoken to a lot of funds recently who've been looking much more closely at living in general, that anything that's to do with homes or to do with beds, all the way from nurseries, student housing, all the way through to senior living, healthcare. How do you see that? Is that something that you're beginning to look at? Do you see this as all part of one kind of umbrella of living, or do you think there's a separate sector here?
I believe that it's a separate sector now. I think that the rental residential will be more and more an umbrella for these asset classes or sub-asset classes of rented residential, be it student housing, micro-living, retirement living, senior living, etc. But I don't think we are anywhere close now.
Okay, good. I wanted to pick up as well, Christian, in terms of when you're looking at how much is the mobility of people, whether that's students or people in work, how much of is that domestic and how much of is that international in terms of the mobility of people looking for this kind of smaller product?
For the student accommodation product, we could certainly say the number of international students has a strong correlation to the demand in this product, because people from a background where these kind of apartments are normal and where you're just used to look for a professional provider of accommodation and rent a room, maybe do it even online. They start looking for the same when they come to Germany or to other European cities to study. More and more, the domestic students also start to enjoy the amenities that we offer, as Samuel pointed out during his presentation, having perfectly designed communal areas and offering really things that make a difference to the students is a huge selling point today. You don't just need to put in a TV and say this is our TV lounge if nothing's happening there. So you really need to think about your product and try to differentiate yourself from the rest of the market. In terms of micro-living and young professionals or professionals, it's all about commuting or going somewhere else to work, than to return during the weekend to your home destination and during the week staying at one of these smaller apartments. I think nobody really is going to stay in the long term in a one-bedroom apartment or a one-room apartment at the moment. Maybe we're going to see trends where this co-living just expands into an area where people in their 20s and their 30s really like this kind of lifestyle and want to live there for many, many years, even if they are able to afford their own bigger apartment. But that really requires a product for this co-living concept. And I think on the German market, this product is not really there yet, but we're definitely going to see interesting things in the next years, I guess. Okay, good. And obviously there's, Brian, there's huge numbers of international students coming into the UK, but also across Europe. I think 1 million Chinese students alone coming into Europe. Just in terms that's obviously driving a lot of growth in the sector, but is there also a chance that could stop at a given point? I mean, what are the challenges? You've mentioned already that there's challenges in terms of planning. Is that one of the challenges, that perhaps at some point growth is not going to keep going up, that it might flatten? What's the position in the UK in terms of both domestic and international students?
Well, I mean, that's a focus of real attention at the moment in the UK investment sector, where we are at a sort of demographic dip of 18-year-olds coming through for the next 2 years or so. So that's at the kind of extreme low point from the UK domestic student demand point. So we know that of those students, something between 30 and 40% of them are going to choose to go to university. So if the first number is smaller, then the latter number could potentially be smaller in terms of applications and then acceptances to universities. What we've seen is the resilience of the UK sector, where the number of students going to university actually hasn't dipped meaningfully over that sort of 5 to 10 year period of the demographic dip of 18-year-olds, but we're at the bottom of that dip next year, and then we'll be going in the other direction. So in terms of the stability of the numbers of students overall going to universities in the UK, that's remained pretty consistent. What we have seen is pockets of opportunities where universities have taken the opportunity to recruit more students, and some universities have consequently lost out. So we are seeing pockets of more difficulties in certain locations, but the stronger universities in general are winning out. And then over the next couple of years, we expect to see more and more UK undergraduates, given that the UK numbers cap has come off as well. So that in UK domestic students terms is quite a positive story. In international student terms, the picture is a little bit more mixed. So for sure, international students are travelling more across the world, and for sure the UK is proportionally maintaining its share of those. Although I do notice that the Australians overtook, Samuel will tell me, the Australians overtook the UK this year for the first time in international student recruitment, I understand. So, the UK it's not accelerating as quickly away as some of the other ones for a bunch of geopolitical factors, which we promised we wouldn't say the B word, so we're not going to do that. However, there is perception, I think, in the international market that UK isn't necessarily as hospitable as it used to be, and the abolition of the post-work study visa is a limiting factor on some students choosing to come to the UK. But that for me is more of a lost opportunity for additional growth than it is necessarily a reduction in the current trends moving up in the UK. So medium long term, still very strong on the UK as a higher education market and sector. I think the dislocation currently caused by the mixed messages coming out of Parliament at the moment is temporary and will work its way through.
Okay, good. And I want to drill down a bit into the investment side. So, Rainer, we've obviously heard from Samuel there in terms of what's driving locations. What's your experience of that in terms of, I suppose, what students are looking for, and also when you're investing, what you're looking at in terms of how you're choosing your locations?
Well, pretty simple: location, location, location. But in real terms, it means when we are looking into an investment opportunity, we're looking what is the macroeconomics of the country, what is the situation of the various cities. Is that a more single-shot situation like we have it in Czech Republic and in Hungary, or is it more a country focus like we see that in Poland or in Austria or Germany or other markets? And we look at the evolution of student numbers. We look at the fact, is there a rental resi market? And if yes, what's the evolution of the latter? What are the rental levels compared to the rental levels PBSA or co-living products would target? And we also look at the operational side of things. What is the situation as regards labor cost? Are there service providers for the various aspects you need to take into consideration, starting from Wi-Fi to cleaning, to get a full picture of what is the return expectation on an NOI level that you can achieve over a cycle of 3 to 5 years on a such scheme. These are the main factors, and to a certain extent that also mirrors the dialogue and Q&A sessions you have with investors when you propose investing in such schemes in various countries all over Europe.
Okay, good. As demand, I suppose, from people becomes more specific, and we've learnt in all of the sessions that we've been doing here, where sectors, whether that's residential or office, are moving towards what the customer wants, making sure that the customer as guest actually gets what they need, and that it's all around servicing that. Do you think it's practical to be able to develop a sort of one-size-fits-all in terms of micro-living, so that same unit could be repurposed, reused for any of those, whether that's business use in terms of short stay, longer stay business use, and also student housing? What's your sense of that?
Well, if you give me the perfect site, which is easily accessible from all sides and no restrictions in terms of building and anything like that, yes, probably we would be able to come up with an ideal model. But since this is just not reality, we have to develop a layout and a concept for each location, and each location is different. So the idea of having a basic room layout, starting with the rooms at first, for micro-living and for students and for seniors, may sound appealing, but I guess there are lots of limitations in terms of the real location and the real building. So I think all developers and operators that come with a brand and their own operationing ideas, they probably have some kind of handbook saying, okay, our product looks like this, our product creates this kind of atmosphere, and that is something that is definitely helpful. I wouldn't try at the moment to squeeze everything into one master layout that fits all categories, because I think you'd spend way too much time creating this layout and then realizing in the second or third project in reality that you made some mistakes, and then all the benefits that you hoped for by this master layout may be gone. So better have a general idea and then be specific to the location and to the needs of your tenants at every location.
Yeah.
Hi. Oh, I actually have a question for you, Samuel, so you better get another mic. You were saying that, for example, for Europe, low tuition fee was a very competitive advantage. And maybe you know now that the French government is studying the raising of these tuition fee for international students. So how do you see that for the competitiveness of France on the market?
It's a question for the panel. I know Brian quite well, so he's quite worried what I'm going to ask him. But it's a fairly insignificant question. Samuel mentioned and showed the yield difference between student and other asset classes. Our broker friends in the UK are projecting that that will compress. Two questions in sense in one, which is A, do you believe that? And why is that likely to happen? But equally, why is there currently such a divergence between, say, office and student when office leases are shortening and the whole product mix is changing quite dramatically, say, in that space?
Great, thank you. And last one.
Question to the German developers. Getting building permission, how do you deal with parking places? What the cities want to have still, believing that every student needs 1 or 2 cars?
Okay, good. Swift answers if we can, gentlemen.
Sure. It's not only France, it's, for example, some parts of Germany are also thinking about it. Finland, for example, applied fees to some of the international students. The case studies are telling us that either may be quite significant, but in combination with the quality of education like we have in the UK. So I haven't read the news today, but I will not use the B word, but I think that the strength of the education, like in US or UK or France or Germany for the particular subjects, is strong enough to balance out certain new things coming to the market. For example, France has the work rights, and so new tuitions, probably not as high as UK, might be downsized, but the work rights might balance it out. So that's what usually happens.
Can I also say, I think that probably only applies to non-EU students into France, because EU students pay the prevailing rate for the local territory. So you're probably talking about the subset of Chinese, Indian students going into France, aren't you? So the number as a proportion of students studying in France is probably relatively low. And depending on what they do with the fees, if they're still half the price of the UK, I don't think it'll turn things around too much for the French.
Good. Do you want to tackle your question, Brian, from...
Thanks. It wasn't my question, but I'll talk about it. I think. Listen, in the long time that me and Mr. White over there have been involved in the sector, we've seen it from when you couldn't fund anything because institutions didn't want to know student accommodation because, you know what, it felt too painful, it felt too complicated, it felt too granular. You've got thousands of leases instead of 2 massive FRI leases, and it just felt like a complicated asset class to get involved with. Well, look where we are today. All of those institutions who 10, 15 years ago wouldn't answer the phone to us are now in this room represented and running around MIPIM talking about student accommodation because, you know what, there's other stuff they're investing in, fantastic commercial leases to wonderful institutions like BHS, House of Fraser, and these guys out here who have had their own problems. If that FRI lease doesn't get paid, you get no income. In a very bad year for student accommodation, you might get 95% of your income. So I think, in general, the popularity of student accommodation will continue to drive the yields in, for sure, against the other asset classes.
Okay, great. And we've got 20 seconds on the German issue.
Okay.
Which one? Just to warn you,
Yeah.
it'll be a brief answer.
On the German market, it's clearly becoming to a competitive factor. So if you take cities like Berlin or Hamburg, where you don't need to provide parking lots, and where you have others who are still on a 1-on-1 ratio bed per parking lot, which kills every 300 unit project in the very early stage. And this is something where the whole of the industry is frequently trying to educate the municipalities. And we see, let's say, opening effects by infrastructure elements, starting from car sharing to fueling ports and public transport accessibility to bring down these ratios. But I think we are way apart from the real requirement, which is more 10 to 1, 15 to 1 than the 5 to 1, 7 to 1, which you can achieve as the best ratios currently. Yeah? This is something which has a huge impact on the economics of a scheme. And at the end of the day, the tenants, the students need to pay for parking lots that no one needs.
Can I just add to that really quickly? That's not just a German problem, as we know that we're seeing this across continental Europe. But in the UK, in arguably the mature market, most mature market, we're seeing local authorities legislate to prevent student accommodation providers allowing their students to park anywhere in the vicinity of the scheme. So I've seen local authorities lobbying in planning, saying, okay, you must commit that none of your students will be parking or bringing a car to this city, which as a landlord is almost impossible to police. However, we are seeing the complete opposite trend in the UK from continental Europe, which hopefully is where continental Europe will end up.
Thank you.